I have a friend of mine who recently lost her husband and still very young, still very vital. Does she no longer have identity then? She still does. And that's if we get so enmeshed in who we are as wife and as mother, when sometimes the Lord shakes things up, we lose sight of who we really are.
Well, we're back with Just Us Girls again. It's so nice having time just with the girls from A Better Us. We've got Diane and Kara and Danielle, and of course, Dr. Mary. We love having you with us, Dr. Mary. You're a clinical psychologist for over 25 years. She has spoken directly into the hearts and lives of singles, families, individuals, couples, talking into those real deep heart issues, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Today, we're going to be talking about something that a lot of women grapple with, and that's finding our identity. Because you know what? We've been married 34 years, and so for 32 of those years, I've been a mom. And I was a stay-at-home mom for the first 14 years, so that was who I was. That was my identity. And then I went back to work, and then I had to juggle more balls, and it becomes overwhelming at times. Like, who am I? What is my identity? And where do I focus my efforts and my attention? I guess it depends on what season of life you're in.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we happen to be, assuming we're kind of the same age, of that generation where we're starting to see a shift, where in the secular world, women are having careers, they're all the way up to CEOs. And then we have a younger generation coming up where that's all they knew is that strong women can rule and strong women can take on very, very high levels of responsibility. And yet we've got the Christian world and the things that we're taught, and there's certainly for me a disconnect because I love my husband and he is of vital importance to me, and I want to honor him, I want to respect him, I do not want to do anything that would diminish him. Yet I struggle when something that I do kind of puts me out a little bit more front stage. So our personality is I talk a lot more and I don't have a problem being on the front stage talking and presenting, and I like getting my makeup done and all that. And he's a behind the scenes kind of a guy. So if you just kind of look at our family, it almost seems like people would say, oh, you're the boss, you're the one wearing the pants in the family. It's like, no, actually, I'm the more opinionated one. But that doesn't necessarily mean the case. But as I'm also raising a daughter, she's 21 now, and I'm super proud of her because she's finding a way to identify her voice and to speak out what she feels the Lord's calling her to do in the area of justice. Then I'm kind of grappling with that. Like, how do we do that? And how do we do it in a way that honors our husbands, that doesn't diminish them? So I would love to hear your stories. I mean, I don't know if you wanted to start there, Danielle.
Man, we could talk all day, I think, between the five of us. But for me, that was a huge issue early on in marriage because, first of all, I was 20 when I got married.
Wow.
A baby.
Yeah.
And not only that, I moved to a different country, into a world where my husband was already established. He had a ministry, a platform. Everyone knew him. And I went from being Danielle to Dan McCauley's wife. And I'm proud of that, but that came with challenges for sure. So it was really just me. First of all, it just takes time sometimes to find our voice. We just have to mature into it. But also, it just took me hearing from the Lord and obeying him, because I really did. It had been all about him. I was working for Dan, but I heard from the Lord, and he said, your voice and your words, I'm going to use you. And I'm going, it's always been about his voice. And it really took me getting out of my comfort zone and having faith in myself to believe that I could have a voice too, and I could find who I was and make a difference and not just be the wind beneath his wings. He could be the wind beneath my wings as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's so good.
I love that.
Yeah, Diane, you probably have the same story as me.
You see me shaking my head, right? Because our stories are similar. I mean, I too came to a different country with my husband. I remember being in school, and I would always tell my roommate, I was always this independent kind of girl, right? I always had a plan. And when we got married, I asked my husband, I said, well, why don't I stay here while you go do your thing and I'll come visit? And he was like, no, that's not gonna work. Because I was like, I didn't wanna lose my identity because I felt it coming, right? And we moved to Canada, And I was so used to working as a young woman. I always had to work because growing up we didn't have much. And at the time I was working for the bank and for Department of Defense, and I just had my little thing going, and I was like, you know, I was ready to take on the world. Moved here and I lost everything. I couldn't work. I was sitting at home every day by myself because I was in a country where I knew no one. No one. And I struggled with that, and I struggled a lot. I tried to figure out my place and couldn't, and so that jealousy creeped in, right?
Resentment.
That
yeah.
resentment, that, well, who are you, that you know? And one day I had to catch myself because I was really starting to get to the point where I didn't want to be here. I was like, I want out. Like, this is not working. Like, I'm losing myself.
Yeah.
And I really had to start praying about it. And I remember praying. And that very next day, my husband had an autograph signing. And he said, why don't you come with me? And he would always invite me, but I felt lost.
Right.
Because I was standing in the corner and all these people groveling and
you're just wife of.
right,
Yeah.
and you're just, oh, that's your wife. Oh, hey, you know, it gets old sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And so that day I was like, you know what, I'm going to come. And I went and I got involved and I talked to people and I mingled. And I heard God say, this is your place. You do belong here. This is your place. You just got to step into it. Right? I was fighting it. I was trying to stay out of it. But he said, you have to step into it. This is your, I'm giving this to both of you, not just to Michael,
Yeah.
but this is your platform as well.
too.
I'm giving both of you a platform like you have no idea. And once I said, okay, maybe it is. And then I started beginning to find myself and find my place and find my identity because I became Pinball's wife. I became, the wife of. And I lost my name. And I would get angry sometimes when people, you're Pinball's wife, or you're, hi, I'm Diane. Right? My name is Diane, people. Right? I do have a
Diane
name,
to
right? Although I love my husband, and my husband honors me, and he respects me, and he always puts me at the front. But I needed people to know that I'm more than just, you know,
Now,
Pinball's wife.
Kara, I know you're married to a man who has a larger-than-life personality,
Yeah.
like Pinball.
Yes.
How do you cope with that?
So I am married to Eric, and he is 6'8", and he has
Literally
Literally larger than
life. And it is wonderful. And our first year was tough for me. I moved away from all my family, from all the familiar, just like both of you guys. And you have to learn who you are. And I remember calling my mom one time, and I was like, I don't know what to do. I'm just Eric's girlfriend or Eric's fiance or Eric's wife, but my name is Kara, and I have a calling, and I am gifted.
Preach it, sister.
And she was like, you know what, Kara, you need to go alone and you need to pray and get into your word. And I remember that was life-changing for me because my true identity comes from God, and it comes from spending time with
Very
Him,
well said.
regardless of the words
Well
that were
said.
spoken over me or what people might say. I know that in Him I can do all things, and I know that Eric supports and he loves and he cheers me on. And regardless if I feel that doors that closed should have opened, it doesn't matter because the Lord guides our steps as a couple, and I needed to trust in that and hope in that and stand on that because some days were tough and some days I felt lost and lonely. I was 21 when I got married, so I was a baby, and so so I needed to remind myself that God is my strength and He will lead my steps regardless if people call me Eric's wife. I know I'm called, and He will
Very
walk
well
me
said.
through.
Very well said.
Yeah, as a couple, you know,
Yeah.
like you said, if we're called to be our husband's wife, we're called into what they are called to, and they are called into us. And
Well, that's a good point. So, yes, maybe traditionally we women would have thought we're called into our husband's ministry, and we're there to support, gird them up behind them. And it's not that we don't do that, but it's also not at the expense of our own calling, because God has wired us with our own gifts and our own calling. And yes, part of it is to be wife to my husband, but the other part of it is this world. There's so much in this world that needs our gifting, and to hide behind my husband is to do a disservice to what the Lord is asking me to do.
Amen.
I love what you said earlier when you were talking, Dr. Mary, about you are the more outgoing in your marriage, and your husband is the more, quiet and reserved man. I'm married to a gentle giant of a guy who just, he's my rock. He's, because I can be kind of bigger and more expressive. But like I said earlier, when we first got married, I was 20, again, very young when we got married. And so I entered into finishing school, and right after school, got pregnant with the first baby. And so just slipped right into motherhood. I was a mom. That was my identity. And then as God started opening doors when our oldest was a teenager, for me to do more outside of the home, I had to really learn how to be that person too. Because I was so used to being Ron's cheerleader, being Ron's support, which I love doing, and I am his biggest cheerleader, and I always tell him that. He's just off camera, that's why I keep looking over here.
He's blushing.
But I had to learn that it was okay to kind of come out of my shell and be myself, who is more bigger and more, out there and creative and
not
expressive.
necessarily be in a box.
Exactly.
I mean, there's that movie where she says to him, "You complete me,"
complete
which
me.
is such a romantic line, but it's actually hogwash. Because we are meant to be codependent, interdependent. Sorry, not codependent. That's another unhealthy. Interdependent. And interdependent means full, whole person coming together with another full, whole person coming together.
Amen.
So I have a friend of mine who recently lost her husband, and still very young, still very vital. Does she no longer have identity then? She still does. And that's, if we get so enmeshed in who we are as wife and as mother, when sometimes the Lord shakes things up, we lose sight of who we really are. And the other thing I would like to add is that if we think of marriage, marriage is not actually God's answer to make us happy. It really is the platform that He uses to grow our faith and to grow our character. It's the thing, the person who's regularly rubbing against us that causes us the most heartache, but also the most joy, so that we can grow in our faith and also in our calling. So who I am today has very much to do with my relationship with my husband and some of the trials that we've gone through, the joys we've gone through, so that by this point, there's a fullness of my calling as there is a fullness of His calling.
And a strong man isn't threatened when his wife steps into her calling. He is her support, like you said, the wind beneath her wings. He is her biggest cheerleader. And that comes as you work together and you support each other. And you're
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, because if you are a woman and you are trying to find your calling and your husband's reacting very negatively, consider whether there's some insecurities or some old theology where you're not supposed to do things outside the home. But don't just stop the process. I mean, do it with great love, with great grace, and maybe you might need some professional help to talk it through. But recognize that, is the Lord using this to help my husband grow and his capacity to protect me? And protecting me also means protecting my identity, protecting my calling, not just protecting my femininity and being just his wife.
This is such a good conversation, and I really hope you husbands have been listening too, because this is how women think. This is how we're wired, and this is a really good talk. So thanks, girls, for being here. Thank you for being with us. Stay with us. There is more A Better Us to come.